Thank you for joining us for our webinar, Sustainability and Fashion, How to Implement Sustainable Practices for Brands and Retailers. Our moderator today is Andrea Kennedy, Sustainability Professor at LIM College and Sustainability Lead at FashionDex. Andrea is a sustainable fashion strategist, educator, publisher, designer, and consultant. She is an assistant professor at LIM College and co-chair of the college's Sustainability Task Force, whose goal is to reduce the carbon footprint by 50% by 2030. Andrea is the founder of FashionDex.com and has stayed on as their sustainability lead and sourcing SME. She is a member and mentor at the Climate Reality Leadership Corps and the UN SDSN network. Additionally, she has designed merchandise and done sustainability consulting for many high-profile fashion labels, including Calvin Klein, Ann Taylor, Bob Mackie, and Pierre Cardin, just to name a few. Joining her today in a discussion is two amazing women who are incredible leaders and role models. They are Amy Hall, Vice President of Social Consciousness at Eileen Fisher, and Julie Verdigo, Director of Sustainability and Social Impact at Free People. Just to give you a little bit of background on both of these amazing women, Amy Hall serves in the role of Vice President, Social Consciousness at Eileen Fisher. She guides the company toward greater alignment with its Benefit B Corp status and their quadruple bottom line framework. Amy collaborates internally and externally to position the company at the leading edge of human, environmental, and economic sustainability. She also chairs the advisory board of Social Accountability International, serves on the board of Made By, and represents the company on the Development Council of Future Fit. In her free time, Amy is an avid cyclist who bicycles and worldwide climate rides on her self-built bamboo bike. Julie Verdigo, Director of Sustainability and Social Impact at Free People, and has dedicated her career to driving change through ethical product creation and community-focused initiatives. She started the Sustainability Department at Free People after leading impact projects for over a decade with Adidas, the National Park Foundation, Cuba One, and Jamela. Julie's work has led her around the globe, from factory floors in Argentina and Germany to teaching sustainable jewelry design in Rio de Janeiro, to building business strategies on the ground with artisanal co-ops in Guatemala, Peru, and India. She has led Free People to earn impact awards from both Girls Inc. and Mercado Global in 2019. Additionally, Julie is on the board of directors at the nonprofit Cuba Skate and the Associate Advisory Board of Girls Inc. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited. I'm going to turn the mic over to you, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Kristen, and thank you to Curve Connect and Lingerie Connect for having us all. And Amy and Julie, I'm so excited to have a conversation on sustainability and fashion and what other brands and retailers can do and learn from both of you in terms of their own journeys for sustainability. So thanks for being here. I don't even need to ask you to introduce yourselves because Kristen just did. So, but let's start with, what is sustainability? I think at this point, we don't have to define it, but it looks different at every company. So if you could just both tell us what sustainability looks like at both at Eileen Fisher and at Free People, that would be amazing.
All right, great. Thanks, Andrea. It's really fun to be here. And hi, Julie. At Eileen Fisher, sustainability covers both the environmental aspects as well as the human aspects of how we make our product, really how we do anything in the company, our facilities, our everyday practices. So looking at every fiber, material, and input on the product, in every product, as well as how it's transported, looking at the people who make the product, looking at the people inside our company and our facilities and our processes. I think that about covers it.
Amazing. Thank you. I love how you said human instead of social side.
I know it's, we go back and forth on that. Language is a whole nother topic.
Language is certainly a whole other topic entirely. And I think that human piece I love, and I think it's something that Eileen Fisher has really pioneered in that sustainability conversation. And, at Free People, it's something that we also consider very much. The human is kind of center to our sustainability discussion, and it always has been. So we don't even really, I always use, and I don't like the word sustainability because it can mean so many different things to so many different people. So it's making sure that the human is at the center of all of our initiatives to be a little bit better every day. And, making, if it's from product creation to the packaging, to what's going on in our factories, to our internal community, just like Amy said, and also the communities near us, like the communities that we touch that might not be directly linked to the supply chain, literally, but maybe they're in our backyards, maybe they're in Philadelphia outside of our headquarters. So the extended community as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Since you both mentioned fabric.
Andrea, you're muted.
Am I?
Now you're not. Now it's good.
I made myself mute and unmuted because it didn't show mute on my end, but sorry, everyone. But since you both mentioned so many, other than the humans, which of course are so important, but you mentioned packaging, products, fibers, materials, and that supply chain, right? So as a matter of fact, at LIM just last week, we had our students mapping garments and counting the people at each factory from all through the tiers and upstream. And we had an average in our one class, 4,500 people that are either directly or indirectly, of course, most of them, part of bringing a product to all of you, right? So we have to think about that the supply chains are so complex and bigger than we can even imagine. But let's just keep talking about the supply chain for a moment, away from the humans, and then we'll go back to the humans. We'll be like a pendulum. But I think a lot of the people who want to implement sustainable practices in their brands or at their stores, because we have both brands and retailers watching, are still asking for product or materials in the same way that they were taught. And if you want a responsible, sustainable, low impact material or product for your store, or fiber button, shoulder pad, or fabric or lace for your line, could you each explain maybe some guidance, one or two ways that they should think differently or ask for differently from suppliers so that they can, make their materials and their supply chains more sustainable?
Do you want me to start, Julie?
Yeah.
Go for it, Amy.
You first, and next time Julie goes first.
Okay, that's a good deal. At Eileen Fisher, we shifted how we source our fibers, our materials, probably about 15 years ago. And at that time, when our designers would go to the trade shows or directly to the fabric sellers and ask for, at that time, something organic, it was kind of an inside joke, the vendor would kind of reach under the table and pull out the one thing they had that was organic, among this whole array of stuff. And nowadays, when they go, or if they were to travel again someday, to a trade show or to a vendor, they would have multiple options. And so the very first question would be, what do you have that's organic? Do you have anything that's organic? Do you have anything that, can you tell me where these materials were grown? Can you tell me how they were processed? So just simple questions like that. But my point about this is, in the early days, it was really hard to find anything that kind of met even very basic standards. And nowadays, so much easier. Do you have anything that's recycled? Just a simple question like that, and you can choose from many options these days. I think that's a great way to start.
Great, thank you. Julie?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We're kind of hitting a really interesting sort of golden age of sustainable sourcing, because years ago, not even too many years ago, it was really difficult, and not only difficult, but expensive. So luckily that price is dropping, and luckily there is more demand, economies of scale. So we are seeing that a lot of our vendors are offering, but a big part of it has also been educating those decision makers within our organization to know beyond what they may have easily heard of. You know, like recently I was chatting with our head of intimates, and she was excited about modal, where, you know, for a long time we were thinking about getting organic, and that was the only way, and that is a wonderful way. And but also, what are other materials that we may not have thought of? And we were trying to not redesigning our non-organic into organic only, but also, is there another material that kind of does the job that is a little bit more sustainable, is a little bit better? So just the knowledge sharing and starting the conversation with the people on the design team, in sourcing, placing the orders, like how can we arm them in our organizations to know that these things exist so that they can then ask.
That's great advice. Really great advice. How I was learned was to kind of say, how fast can I get it and how cheap will it be? You know, so to really kind of remove those and ask those things first is so important, right? And the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So ask away. Some more companies will add more recycled, organic, non-toxic materials to their lines. So let's stay with sourcing and swing it back to the human aspect. Again, these are really huge supply chains that involve a lot of people, mostly women. And what about, you know, are there any ways that you recommend that brands and retailers can ensure ethical treatment of everybody along their supply chains? Is there anything you can share that, you know, you found or you learned or you put in place at either of your companies, and or advice for those watching?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's my turn, but this is such a challenge, and it's such a challenge for us, you know, as a big public company, and Free People is one of a couple of brands, Urban Outfitters, Anthropologie, Integrator Group, and our sourcing is a shared service. So we have so many sort of hoops and layers to get to our true transparency of information. And, you know, there are auditing, like third parties involved in terms of auditing and making sure and relaying information back to us. And it gets, the larger you get, I wouldn't say the more complex it gets, but sometimes it does get quite complex, and the transparency becomes difficult. So back to Andrea, your point of like asking the questions until you get those answers. And it's not the norm necessarily within these big organizations to be finding the tiny little details of what's actually going on. And a lot of the third-party organizations are maybe used to that level of transparency. So pushing to ask, and, you know, we can't visit every single place that we source from, but I think the partnering piece is huge. And as well as creating our own product, we also sell other brands' products as well. So holding those brands to the same level of transparency is also just asking. And if we could show up at everyone's door, we would. But I think it's having those hard conversations whenever you get the chance at every level.
Julie, can I follow up with a question? Is that okay? Do you guys at Free People have your own, like a code of conduct, or do you follow, you know, like a universal standard? How do you, what are the kind of questions you're asking your suppliers?
Yeah, we do. We have sort of a massive code of conduct, and there are questions that, you know, this is referenced with a third party auditing system as well, but we have a team that runs this also. And we sort of, you know, between how they're working with the factories and how we are, it's sort of like we're hoping we have all the information that we can possibly get. But I think at this point, there's always more to know. So I also want to know the nitty gritty of what Eileen Fisher is doing to get to the bottom of so many things, because
yeah, this is a very, very challenging area. You know, we've been trying to tackle the well-being of people in our supply chain since the mid-90s. that's when we started. And it is really hard to make change happen, no matter what kind of code of conduct we have or aspire to, and share with our suppliers. Change takes a lot of time, takes a long time, and convincing suppliers that that it's worth their effort, worth their time, worth the expense to make changes, to kind of change a system that in their mind isn't broken, is really challenging. What we've done is we've adopted and abided by and shared with our suppliers the SA 8000 standard for many years. It's, to us, the gold standard. And over the years, a few of our suppliers have gotten certified to SA 8000, but regardless, it has remained our code of conduct. But we've always just paid attention to the first tier, the production, finished good tier. Below that, it's like an iceberg. There's a lot of people in that supply chain. And I was thinking about how do we haven't had the bandwidth to directly focus on the people at those tiers of our supply chain, but we do accept certain certifications like GOTS, Global Organic Textile Standard, which does include within its assessment certain fundamental human rights assessments. So I think that there are ways to cover more of the supply chain than just the first tier, even at a minimal level, just to ensure that people are getting their fundamental human rights addressed.
I think that tier conversation is so important, because obviously the low-hanging fruit is the tier 1. But when I was working at Nest, for example, which I know still works with Eileen Fisher, it's all about going down that supply chain and to the home worker economy, which is doing a lot more than we think it is. Like, most likely all of us are wearing or touching or staring right now at something that was made within someone's home, and that's also not really talked about at the large scale level, and it becomes very difficult to get there in terms of detective work.
And most of those people are the most vulnerable people in our supply chains, right? They're the most distant from us in terms of many layers of other vendors in between. So they don't even know may not even know who they're making their product for. They don't often read or write, so there's no documentation of how much they're getting paid necessarily. There's so much at risk in terms of how they're living out their livelihoods and trying to support their families. So we have done what we can to support them and lift them up and give them access to their basic benefits, and try to improve their livelihoods as much as we can, largely with the help of Nest.
They've done some beautiful work advocating for those communities. They're the most vulnerable. I've been on some of the auditing visits with the Nest team in that space, and the things you see and the brands that you see, whose names I won't mention, within these working conditions, it's shocking. It's shocking, but it's important. It's important that people know this, and again, to advocate, because it's a very important thing to keep alive as well. These women wouldn't otherwise have an opportunity, the women specifically in the home worker economy, wouldn't otherwise have access necessarily to get to work because they're caring for the family. So it's a group we want to protect as well, and not just say, oh, you don't meet the standards, you don't have a fire extinguisher ready to go. Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow. Amazing. I'm so glad you brought up the home worker economy, because and especially in the countries that they're living in, these are also communities that are really going to be impacted and are being impacted by climate change. So much work in fashion in terms of moving towards being a sustainable fashion line, you hear, is often in the environmental. Both of you are in social consciousness teams, so we're chatting a lot about the human part, but a lot of times I moderate several of these a month sometimes, or on them myself, and a lot of the conversation around surrounds the environment. What we do have to realize is how connected they are, because when we decrease or reduce negative environmental impacts, we automatically increase the positive social impacts. So they are connected. But let's talk about these people that are so impacted by climate change that are along our supply chains. And fashion really is the depending on whose research you're read the second or third biggest industry in terms of negative greenhouse gas emissions and climate change impacts. So what about footprints? Are you measuring your environmental footprints? Are you working towards reducing climate change? Is there anything? If so, what is it? And Amy, do you want to kind of talk about climate change? I remember
Sure.
on 53rd Street, right before COVID, there was a really big sign in the Eileen Fisher on Madison. I think it's between 53rd and 54th, actually with the words climate change on a big poster. And this sweater helps work towards combating. Maybe you didn't use the word combat, but.
Yeah, so when I think about climate change, so for us, it's all about carbon, of course. I mean, there are many other things. We could talk about water, we could talk about many things, but I would say, so we set our first kind of carbon goals maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and we kind of went public with them with our Vision 2020 initiative. So one of those goals was by the year 2020 that we would reduce our CO2 emissions from our product shipping by 20% over a 2015 baseline. So in 5 years, we actually ended up reducing the carbon emissions by 33%. So we exceeded our goal. So that was good. And we'll keep working on it. It doesn't stop there. Now we have new goals. But another one was that we do offset all of our emissions from shipping to our distribution center. We offset everything. Of course, that's not actually changing how we're shipping, but at least we're counteracting it but by funding some renewable energy projects in different parts of the country. We also, I think that poster that you saw in the window was talking about a sweater made from regenerative wool. Right. So we have invested in regenerative wool over the last 2 or 3 years. We've really taken a strong stance on that. And I think at the end of last year, we were about 47% of the wool that we were using in our product would be classified as regenerative, which means that it's being farmed with practices that take into consideration, the full biodiversity of their farm, and in so doing, draw down carbon. So it actually holds on to the carbon. It doesn't just stop it from being emitted, but it draws it down. So that's a net positive. And then, of course, we also talk about the energy used by our own facilities, which, although we've been able to address it, we've had a lot of changes to the company in the last year as a result of the pandemic. So we don't have quite as much office space anymore, and I think so naturally is going to be a net positive impact from that, which wasn't in the plan, but it's a win-win in the end. So those are the different ways that we think about carbon for our company.
Amazing.
That's so inspiring. I mean,
inspiring.
I am blown away by all of this because, well, I know at Urban, we're a little behind Eileen in terms of our formalization of this journey for sure. So, I see brands like Eileen Fisher and Patagonia as the ones that sort of the big companies that weren't necessarily built with sustainability at the forefront. Like right now we're in the process of how do we get there? We started kind of with that mindset. We grew larger than, we could maybe have complete control over. Now we're trying to get into that realm again of making sure that every decision is a conscious one and kind of treating it as if we were slightly smaller than we actually are on this journey. But we start with what we can control, and renewable energy is a big one for us. At our core facilities, we've invested in a lot of renewables. Our largest distribution center has one of the largest solar arrays in the US. So we're really investing in renewables. Also, our home offices as well are powered by renewables. And in terms of...
That's great.
That's great. And you own and operate those, so you can do that, right?
Exactly.
Right. What everyone realizes is all of those supply chain partners you don't own and operate. It's harder to do. So.
I know. And then, Andrea, of course, we talk about stores and what the potential is there. When you're leasing, that's a whole other realm. But right now, the facilities we own and operate, we have control over. We make those decisions. But in other projects are really in fabrics and fiber, and trying to figure out where we can produce more locally for the high volume pieces, where we can produce within the US, not necessarily overseas. So specifically for our movement line, which is our kind of athleisure sort of activewear components, we are trying to focus most of our sourcing where we can within the US. And these are just, you know, step by step by step. And then those fabrics, how can we replace petroleum-based synthetics with more natural fibers? And all of this is sort of part of the larger carbon conversation. But we're, you know, over the last a little over a year, we started tracking this, and we're tracking and where can we go from here, and what does carbon look like, what does water look like, and for each of our core product categories, we're tracking those. We've kind of like captured current state and in the process of creating future state and what that looks like too. Yeah, but a lot of it is really focused in the product selection at the moment and where it is created, and finding that more can be done in the US than we initially kind of had planned for.
That's amazing. Place-based production is really so important in terms of lowering your impact. And it doesn't mean everything has to be domestic. It just means that things need to be in the same region of wherever you're producing them, right? But let's get back to what you talked about, your Free People FP movement line, because I'm thinking that so many of our viewers, because they're in either swimwear, lingerie, activewear themselves, are using those fossil fuel derived fibers for stretch wear, for innerwear, for Spanx type things, and all of what we think about when we think about undergarments. Do people still say undergarments other than me? And innerwear and all of that. But so yes, if we can have fossil fuel free fabrics, then we will really have climate conscious clothing, because once you take them out of the ground, we can't put them back. And that is the most important thing in order to get to a fully circular fashion industry of the future, is really not using all of those raw fossil fuels anymore. So that leads me to circularity, actually, because, and so does the regenerative wool piece that Amy talked about, because regenerative farming practices make healthy soil, right? So healthy soil is not healthy if you've got nylon and spandex and polyester and plastic buttons and nylon zipper pulls and fake fur in a landfill, right? So there's a lot of circular practices. One is to design out waste. One is to design out toxins and synthetics that are new. And there are many. So let's talk about circularity at both of your companies. It can involve things like we just talked about, the regenerative practices and trying to find healthier fabrics, but it could also be, you know, taking back, reselling, repairing. What are you working towards in terms of circularity, please?
Julie, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll jump in. And I'm like, I want to hear all the details about your regenerative wool program. That is incredible. We are starting to bring some wool in, and I know there's been some experimentation for the performance area, because wool is amazing in terms of sweat wicking and all those things that a lot of the petrol-based fibers have done. Like, we realized that wool's been there doing that for a long time. So there's some curiosities in wool. Outside of our movement line, hemp and linen have been a really important sort of growth opportunity for us, where it really fits the Free People aesthetic naturally. So it's been a kind of a nice little win-win and an easy, like, low-hanging fruit for us. The linen is Euro linen, and it's traceable to the farms in France, and, you know, it's regenerative as well. So the hemp and linen are what we're like very excited about in terms of starting from the soil. But that's kind of, you know, designing into circularity is sort of like, that's where we're beginning to be, and then where we're trying to get to. And then starting with, again, like the low-hanging fruit, phase one is also, how do we increase the utility of the things we've already produced? And that's what we've been working on a lot, and it ties in a lot to a lot of our social initiatives. So, you know, if our customer we're finding is over the product herself, like, can we offer her a solution of selling it again? So we're in the process, well, we've already launched a partnership with Poshmark, which is great for a reselling platform. And we're really like in pilot curiosity phase as well, but it's proven to be really interesting. And we're also doing a lot of internal experiments around the reselling. We've been selling vintage for like over 10 years in our stores and on our platform too. And just sort of increasing that utility, I think, is so important, because we see over like 3/4 of product ends up incinerator in a landfill within less than 2 years of being produced. And those numbers don't need to be that way. And that end of life for products that weren't necessarily designed into circularity is also a huge focus for us now. We've also partnered with nonprofits who are asking for the product. The Wardrobe is a beautiful nonprofit outside of Philadelphia that helps vulnerable women who are going through transitions. If it's a prison reentry into society program, if they're unemployed, they have hanging for undergarments, yes, I use that word too, and clothing for interviews and things like that. So we found a really good donation partner with them. So our circularity kind of looks a little different. It's kind of all over the place. It's like end of life for what we've already created, and then how do we begin to design into that. But I know that Eileen Fisher has a beautiful sort of circular upcycling program that I've always loved checking out in the store. Also merchandise beautifully. It was like that rainbow. I love walking into Eileen Fisher stores and seeing that rainbow of older product.
And I bought a lot of that Renew. It used to have another label too, but
yeah, it's gone through a few name iterations.
I have a couple Fisher Founds in my.
Yes, wow, that's one I haven't heard of.
Found, that's nice. I like that.
Didn't you have a Fisher Found for a while?
It was Fisher Found, and before that it was Green Eileen. So now it's Renew, and it will be Renew for the foreseeable future. We're landing there. So I love hearing how Free People is evolving, and in our case, our goal is always to keep the items in use in their original form, their first form, as long as possible. It's that longevity piece. It's making something that's very high quality that can last several years, not just a few wearings, right? So, and then once the customer either changes her mind, like grows away from it, decides she doesn't want it anymore, giving her an option to bring it back to us, where our first choice is to resell it as is. We clean it, but we just, if it's in excellent condition, which about half of what we receive back is, then we put it out there in that nice rainbow array that you just described. I've bought several pieces myself at our Renew store or online. We have, you can buy it online. Or in most of our stores now carry some Renew merchandise. Some of my favorite pieces are from Renew because they're pieces that they're truly one of a kind now. And they might be something that I remember seeing, 5-10 years ago, and I wished I'd bought, or anyway, they're really vintage. And then the things that we can't resell because they're just not in good enough quality, we either patch, or maybe we'll cut up and make something lightly, new out of pieces of old clothing. And the ultimate is for those clothing items that get returned to us that are really in bad shape and we just can't salvage them in any way, we have a whole felting process, which is called Waste No More. And I have one of the pieces. This is step back. This is a little backpack.
Beautiful.
But we make pillows and wall hangings and rugs and other kinds of bags. And we have, we carry some of these things on our website. We have partnered with West Elm. We have sold them, on their own to galleries and other businesses. So it's just all different kinds of efforts to keep things in circulation as long as possible and keep it from the landfill. And our thing is we don't throw anything out. So we have a warehouse full of bags of old Eileen Fisher clothes, as well as shoes, which we're still trying to find a place for and a solution for, and it's going to go on. And I should mention also, we take data from what we take back. If we're getting a lot of something, that's really important data. If we're getting a lot of a certain kind of pants that are always snagged, or if they're always worn in a certain place, that data is being captured and fed back to the design team so that they can consider that going forward different fabric, different design, whatever it might take to avoid that in the future.
Yeah, the information needs to go to everyone, right? To filter up, down, across, so that we don't make those mistakes anymore. All right, I have so many things. I think let's start with what you just talked about, patching and taking back and repairing. And patching costs money, right? Costs time and money. And I think, and I know from working with brands myself on sustainability plans, during the summers and whatnot, when I work with brands mainly, that sometimes I'll have some great, in my opinion at least, but I know proven initiatives, and there's always someone, usually from the top, saying, but it can't cost us anymore, and we're not lowering our profit, and we still have to continue selling blank at $29.99 like we have for the last blank amount of years. So, you know, what can we do that has an immediate ROI and costs nothing and all of that? So,
Costs nothing.
What?
Costs nothing. I know, that's a funny one.
But the question is about cost, because ethical practices, sustainable practices. At first, right now, you're right, Julie, the cost is coming down because they're starting to scale, but still, a lot of this requires sometimes human power, knowledge, you know, well, that companies don't have the money to use. So is there a place that companies could kind of start that doesn't require a large financial investment? Something small, you know, it could be anywhere, right? Because any step if it's a step towards lower impacts, is a good step. But Julie, you can go first. Oh, Amy, sorry.
No, go ahead. Julie can start.
I'm losing track of who went first.
I will. This one I think is so important because, well, all of these questions are just like massively important, but it's where to begin when you know you have this many different things to do, and that bottom line pressure is real. It's so real when you're publicly traded, etc., even smaller, and you're trying to keep the lights on. How do you focus on sustainability? I mean, the first thing I would say is education and knowledge is free, and just starting that conversation and making sure that somebody has the time to get the facts and share that within the organization, because so much of it is cultural. And culture, people think that culture can't shift, but it's something that we're sort of seeing where our culture is shifting in a way, just knowing that there are sustainable initiatives happening based off of some educational programs we put into place, that now I'm starting to see people from other departments coming to me saying, oh, I had this idea. And this is after, you know, a little over a year of like a formalized program put in place. It takes time, but starting that conversation internally, like not go external for the knowledge. Don't start talking about it as a brand externally. Start internally, educate yourselves, understand what are the main issues, some of the fibers, start doing tons of research, even if you're not necessarily the person making the fiber decisions. Start following your curiosities in terms of, you know, what's better, what is BCI cotton versus organic cotton versus GOT certified cotton, and start having those conversations. And as an organization, we really need to create the framework for those conversations to exist. So I think the knowledge piece is really important, and allowing people to have the curiosity to turn into the questions. And then I really think, like, absolutely, I'd love to have a huge sustainability team in support of a lot of these initiatives, but I also disagree with that too, where I think the most successful setup of human power working in sustainability within an organization is when you have everyone across functions, like the designers, the people in operations, the finance team, all on board and also educated. It's not just educating the person making the fabric decisions, it's everybody across the organization. So ensuring that cross-functional conversation is happening is kind of where I think it should begin.
Amen to that.
I agree, fully integrate. In terms of a place to start that won't cost a lot of money, one thought I have, or one suggestion would be, instead of going for the 100% organics, start with a blend. 5% organic, 10% organic, whatever you can muster up. The second thing is, what we did was we didn't just take, let's say, a pair of cotton denim jeans that were made out of conventional cotton one season and then flip them to organic cotton the next season, because that would have automatically, customer wouldn't have swallowed the increase in price. What we did do is make a different product out of organic cotton for the new season that was, so the customer didn't have a price to compare it to, a previous price to compare it to. It was just something new, and this is how much it cost. And we kind of tested the waters that way. And once those products started to take hold, then we slowly, you know, got rid of the other conventional ones. Or we were able to transition some of those too, but eventually. The second thing we did was, instead of saying, this is our spend on cotton this season, and next season is going to be 20% more because we're going to make, you know, we're going to purchase organic, and oh my gosh, everybody would have flipped out. Instead of doing it that way, we looked at the whole season of our product margin, and we looked across all products. So not just the one that we were thinking of transitioning to organic, but the viscose, the linen, the silk. And we said, where is our biggest margin? And let's just shave off a little bit of that and invest that into this new fiber over here. So it was more palatable. And we kind of lovingly called it our eco bank. And we kind of said, okay, so we have this much money. We're going to shave off of the margin and we're going to invest it over here. And we did that for a year or two until we started to build up enough momentum around, at that time, organic or, you know, sustainable. And it didn't become so onerous going forward. And now 75% of our product is classified as eco in the way we look at it. So that's how we started. And then it just picked up from there.
Amazing. I love how you're suggesting start with something new, a new product, a new capsule, a new, right? And go from there with that domino effect. And then Julie, I also really loved how you talked about educating everyone and internally, and everybody matters. There's a great paper I read, I think it was called, I'm Not Mopping the Floor, I'm Putting a Man on the Moon.
Yes.
But really, when you engage everyone, and everyone is part of that message, which absolutely happens at Eileen Fisher. I've been up there, you know, everyone is really a sustainability ambassador at that company. You know, I think that that's so important. Let's talk about challenges going to completely moving into another direction. But has there been a big challenge that you have overcome in terms of working towards sustainability? How did you approach it? What was the solution, if you're willing to share? Just so people can, I always think everyone loves to hear about, they all have their own challenges at their companies, brands, stores. So Amy, want to kick us off on this one, please?
You know, the thing that I was thinking about, or that comes to mind, is a story I just shared about how did we kind of get over that first hurdle of starting to offer organic. Another one that comes to mind is the challenge around living wage and how hard it is to actually make that happen in a supply chain where you do not have dominance. You know, you're not the primary brand within a factory or even within a series of factories. And maybe the other brands there are not asking for a living wage. So what we realized as we were, you know, investigating this issue is there are a lot of factors related to living wage. It's not just that one factory and how much they pay, but it's also our own practices. And are we actually providing the space and the, are we enabling the factory to do the right thing? And what we realized as we were, you know, took a step back and looked at all of our practices, which are often called purchasing practices in the industry, we realized that different seemingly small and innocuous decisions or changes along the way in the life cycle of a product, whether it's maybe a slightly later shipping date for a label, or like adding 100 more units to an order, or changing the color, or changing the collar style, something like that. All of these little things can add up in like snowball, and they all end up at the factory and adding pressure to the factory. And the delivery date is still fixed, and the factory has to hurry up and finish everything. So what happens? People work overtime. They may not be compensated for it. A factory doesn't want to tell us because he doesn't want to lose the business. And the poor person at the end loses out as a result. And so we've taken it upon ourselves for the last several years to really try to tease apart those purchasing practices and try to shift our internal calendar, which has been a very, and we're not finished yet. It's just this ongoing challenge because people are really fixed, attached to their routines and attached to their own ways of getting work done. And but I just say this as an example of it's not an easy fix, and I think this is a industry-wide issue. But if we all become a little more introspective, and you mentioned it earlier, Andrea, about I just want the cheap price and that kind of way that we're used to doing things. Let's take a step back and say, what if we did things a little differently? Slow down. That idea of slow fashion. We might have some unintended good consequences at the end, like the effect it'll have on the workers.
Unintended good consequences. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Yeah.
Amazing. Thanks, Amy. Julie, do you want to add anything?
Oh yeah, I mean, slowing down is a challenge. Slowing down is such a challenge when your customer is even used to X number of deliveries every single month, and it's not even, it's pressure from every single area of the business that's been used to doing business a certain way. Like, how do you put the brakes on but keep the business going and keep things in a healthy state? So that shift is definitely a challenge, and start thinking about the product in a different way. I think circularity has really helped us. Like, that whole concept has helped us think, okay, increasing utility, and how can we also become part of that second life of the garment? And it doesn't necessarily mean environment over business. Like, yes, I would have it that way if I could, but knowing that we're working for for-profit companies, like, those have to go hand in hand. So I think finding the solutions that help us slow down, that also support the business, is definitely a challenge, but the circularity piece is sort of helping there. The other challenge is, and because we were newer and not necessarily shaped as a sustainable company, was defining sustainability in terms of the concrete. What is, what isn't, because now we're offering, we have this initiative we call Care FP, and that's our sustainable apparel offering, and putting together, those internal standards for us. It was a really big challenge, and we got to a point where we feel good about where we are, but we know that fabrics and conversations and information changes every single day. So for us, this is, if it's vintage, we have an eco-conscious category. And for us, because we're newer to the conversation, we feel like 50% threshold, 50% and above is something that we feel is worth talking about. And that brings me to a whole other challenge of communication as a massive challenge. Like, how much do you share of what you're doing, and when do you, at what point the customer deserves to know, but you also need to earn the right to speak about it as well. So at this point, we're sort of now that we've developed our standards of sustainable product and we're communicating it to her, we don't want to shout from the mountaintops and say, this is the most sustainable thing, because the most sustainable thing is to stop buying and not buy anything from us at all. But in case you're curious, you deserve to know, here's what the garment is made of. That dance is definitely a challenge every single day. We're like, are we over communicating? Are we under communicating?
Right. People are afraid of greenwashing. They're afraid of their reputation. I know in the essence of time, we don't have much left, but I did want to ask about, do you tiptoe in your communications? Do you get loud and proud? So you're kind of doing a little of both, it sounds like.
Yeah, over at Free People, we were very much tiptoeing in the early days of formalizing this. And we had some initiatives we were proud of, like, we've never used a single-use plastic bag in stores, and we always donate back to, and never, and we've always had a vintage program going on. So those things were things we were used to speaking about, but not really under the guise of sustainability. And for the newer initiatives, like changing fibers and looking into supply chain, that wasn't something that we felt proud to shout about. And now that we have strategies in place and we're developing over a year now we're starting to build up what that looks like. But we're kind of going from tiptoeing. Like, I always feel more comfortable, and we have a lot more going on under the hood than what's going on our social media channels. But I think now it's that balance. Like, the customer deserves to know, so she can be informed when she's making the choice too. So
amazing. Amy, you've done both too, right? You tiptoed early on at Eileen Fisher, and then you got loud and proud.
Yeah, and I think we even got louder last year, especially with the sort of political fervor that was happening in the country. But in general, I think what we have settled in with is, the internet is an amazing thing. You can, the hyperlinks really serve us well. So the customer that wants to know more can continue to kind of dive in and click through. There's always something on the product page. And if she wants to understand, well, why is organic better? Or what are you doing about, the sheep or whatever, she can click through and find more information. And there's tons of it there. So, it's there if you want it, and you can gloss over it if you don't want it. And same thing, I just checked our Instagram account, and it comes up because, as I said earlier, 75% of our product is quote unquote eco, and so there is a story attached to most of the things we carry, and it's just how much do you want to really hear about or whatever. So we try to make it accessible to everybody who has different levels of interest.
And the other challenge I'll add that we're sort of going through those growing pains now is in some ways I'm so grateful for the internet where you can click and click and click and keep going and keep going. But sometimes you do want to share, like, this is a really interesting initiative, but our, let's say, communication tools like an email aren't really built for that. They're built for pretty pictures. And when they're like, give me a 1-sentence blurb on the fiber, I'm like, I can't do that in 1 sentence. Like, we need this much because we need to share everything transparently that's going on there. So right now we're like, wait, so we kind of reshape the way we're communicating all things when we start to bring this into the loop, because I don't feel good just saying, oh, it's organic. It's like, we need to explain so much more here. So we're like, it makes us rethink our communication systems overall.
Yeah. That whole storytelling piece. Do you be clear and concise, or do you kind of take them on a journey so it's memorable? Same questions, right? And there's no right or no wrong. I think the only wrong thing is to continue business as usual. But a few things I want to say before we have our last question, just a few takeaways, like when you talked about exceeding your carbon reduction goals, Amy, that the Eileen Fisher Company had done. I just want to remind people it's really important to measure, because if you don't measure, you can't manage it, and you wouldn't be able to even post that goal, which I assume you have on your website somewhere. And then I also loved how you talked about how change takes a lot of time. And it does take a lot of time. And I think people often want a quick fix and quickly, but it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of thinking. It takes a lot of education, as you talked about, Julie. And, it's not a race, and together we can go far. And then I guess also I loved enabling factories to do the right thing. We have to kind of just change the way we speak to all of our partners so that they can do the right thing. So important, all of these things. So these are tough times for a lot of people, a lot of businesses, for all of us, right? But everybody watching. I don't think there is anyone immune from what's happened for the past year. So what keeps you optimistic? What keeps you hopeful?
I actually think that the pandemic has really brought to light, has connected the dots for a lot of people between what's going on in the earth and our own well-being, and kind of what we need to move forward in the healthiest and most meaningful and productive way. And so I've seen the emergence of a lot of small, entrepreneurial, sustainable fashion businesses. There seem to be a lot of them coming up. I think people really want to do something and do it the right way. I see a lot more resale and rental options out there. So I just feel like the marketplace is just kind of bustling right now with better options that are really going to serve the needs of human beings on this planet in a way that will ensure that our children and grandchildren have a place to live. So I feel optimistic about that.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, well, I mean, speaking of the children and grandchildren's future, like I feel like I really stay optimistic when I'm like partnering and engaging with youth, like really like partnering Andrea with your class. For example, the sustainability students at LAM College are phenomenal. I feel like they keep me on my toes. They keep me inspired for so many reasons. They're asking the hard questions, they're giving the tough feedback, but it's so inspiring to know that these are conversations that are happening at a much more robust and frequent, consistent level than they had been before. So that makes me so hopeful for the future. Like, this is what our youth is looking like. This is what our future leaders have on top of their mind. Then we're on a really positive road towards progress. And I think a lot of times for many other functions within business, we're like, experience and tenure is everything. You know, you must be, to be a CFO, you have got to work through the company for many, many years. In finance, for sustainability, like, yes, you need to have experience and things like that. But I think it's one of those areas where listening to people who don't necessarily have the experience is kind of the most like important place to focus, and not focusing on what you've done in the past. I think that newness factor and that the mirror that I'm seeing youth hold up to us. So partnering again, like with LAM, and we work really closely with Girls Inc., which is a beautiful nonprofit that supports young women in middle school and high school throughout the US. Who are mostly in inner cities, but we have a mentorship program with them, and the hard conversations that come up in those discussions with the girls too, that keeps me optimistic. Like, this is the perspective that they'll be bringing to business in the future. Yes.
Amazing. I'm feeling very optimistic right now. So thank you both. For all of you watching who want to implement sustainable practices at your brand or at your retailer, think about everything that was said. Think about your fibers, think about your materials, think about that supply chain, think about those workers, ask those tough questions, enable your suppliers to have some time to take it slow so they don't have to rush their workers, pay them less, or fly the goods in. And just think about implementing all of these wonderful circular practices that we've just all heard about. And if you do want a course, I'm going to plug myself for a moment. There's a new course on a program called Motif for sustainability and fashion that I just put out there too. So you can search it on Motif. But so we want to thank Curve Connect and Lingerie Connect. And thank you so much, Amy Hall and Julie Verdugo, for sharing your time and passion and knowledge and being collaborative and sharing what works in your own work with everybody watching. And thank you all.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. Oh, you provided so many thought-provoking ideas and inspiration. And I hope this conversation becomes a catalyst for other brands, designers, any of our audience actually watching to really think about how we can make change. And both of you are so inspiring. I can't thank you enough. And Andrea, thank you for asking all the hard questions. You know, every time I thought in my head, I really want to know about this, you asked the question already. So you beat me to it. But anyway, thank you again so much.
Yeah,
and
Julie, thank you.
I hope we can meet again in person. Yeah.
Yes. In the fall, hopefully.
In the fall. Yeah. And continue these conversations. So important to get the word out. So thank you again.